why do I value Vibe development? When I first started getting involved with language models and generative AI, it was a little tricky because as a developer myself and someone who really prided myself in being able to code in Python, I was really into like focusing on object-oriented development in a space where I was really like ETL heavy, a lot of data science, working at Databricks. It was a good way for me to flex my muscle and really have something unique that I could offer the team, my customers, that they didn't typically see in standard solutions architect. Having a background in DevOps and site reliability engineering and applications development, I spent a considerable amount of my time really focusing in and honing my software development skills. So usually that looks something along the lines of thinking in three axes, for applications. So we think in encapsulation, we think in polymorphism, we think of inheritance. And for those of you who don't know how software is typically engineered, we develop these things called objects, which generally share two characteristics, attributes and behaviors. So Vibe coding threw that all on its head because no longer do we need to worry so much about that. We could rely on the fact that prompt engineering and code generators from these large language models would have that awareness on how to compose objects to build for applications. And when we ask a generative AI to vibe code an application for us, usually it takes these ideas into consideration. I think that vibing is more than just coding these days. It's a new era that we're getting into of learning and creating. And it's really interesting and exciting because all of a sudden, we're taking away this barrier, this knowledge gap between someone who has a good idea and someone who's able to code. And we're giving more people than ever the ability to write their own applications without having a degree's worth of knowledge on how to engineer and orchestrate software. It's really important then that when we accept vibe coding into our development, that we accept what it's good at and we acknowledge what it's not. And that's where a lot of the human feedback needs to come in. The natural tendency is to take the output of whatever AI gives us and just roll with it. And that is one thing that I want to pump the brakes on a little bit. It tries to make an approximation or a best guess based on what we prompt. And that can be highly variable depending on the skills of the prompter. Now, that can be both good and bad. It can give us an application front to end that is fully functional for all intents and purposes. And in a lot of cases, that might be okay. But where the skilled developer is going to come in, they're going to stop the prompt partway through and make adjustments and tweaks as necessary. So when we look back at an application and we say, okay, this is its function, this is what it needs to do, we go from A to B to C to D, we can actually halt the generation process and start adjusting it to how it behaves or what it's doing. And that does take a bit of prior knowledge. So a good developer who's fully embracing vibe coding will be able to adjust how that application code is being generated and apply a slightly more human approach to it. And that's actually really important because that's what gives a lot of the software that we know and love so much character and personality. So let's take a step back for a moment and look and see what vibe coding has actually done for the world of software development. And really, if I want to break it down, there are three kinds of developers right now. The first kind is a new developer or someone who has a great idea and comes into a vibe coding session and takes essentially this big bang approach. They'll tell the generative AI what they want, and it will just set it off. That is the big bang approach to vibe coding. The second type is the developer that rejects vibe coding entirely. These are the devs that think that they can code an application better than AI ever could. While that might be true in some circumstances, what it does neglect is it does neglect the large corpus of data that an AI is trained on to help develop software that's better, more robust, well-rounded, and typically more secure in that. The third type, I would say, is actually the rarest type of vibe coder, and that is, in my opinion, the most important, and that is the hybrid. The hybrid has a good sense and a good idea of what writing software requires, how to design software, how to architect it to behave and act and respond in a certain way, but leverages generative AI to support them. So think about it more in the context of using generative AI in this case as like a research or a grad student. I like to think that's my approach to vibe coding, and that's why I've actually embraced it fully into my development. These types of developers tend to act more like managers, tend to have more hands-on experience at the micro level. They have a more organic approach, and that's something that vibe coding offers us uniquely in the application space. Vibe coding allows us to pivot very, very fast, faster than we possibly can as humans. It can assess a number of different situations and circumstances and formulate the best guess based on all of the knowledge that it has been trained on. These are also the people that I tend to respect the most, because what they're doing is they're taking new approaches to writing software and being creative with their use of generative AI and vibing. Now, I'm talking about this in the context of software and applications development, but it applies so much more broadly to the rest of the world. To me is the real value of, like, when I think about my approach to working with generative AI or vibing, what I do is I build this personal framework, and that framework really tries to capitalize on the advantages of generative AI and its ability to do massive, deep research. Meanwhile, permitting and allowing me as an architect, as an engineer, as a designer to still have that creative autonomy. And so I see myself now more as someone who drafts the blueprints for the building and then hands it off to the contractor to do the actual implementation. And that's where our human strengths are going to be very difficult to replicate with AI. In terms of hands-on coding, I'm actually fine giving that up. I want to be the guy sitting behind the drafting board, putting together the blueprints for the application and making changes and edits based on the client needs. So where AI is particularly strong and where I decide to leverage it are in three key areas. First, it can research an awful lot of data really, really fast. That is such a critical capability of AI. It's underestimated. And honestly, it's so hidden beneath the veneer of everything else that it can do. The second thing it can do is it can summarize a huge amount of data very, very fast and very, very efficiently, and it can frame it and put it in such a way that it's designed to be consumed by a human or a machine or both. AI is very good at pivoting that and coalescing and putting things together. For the longest time, when I started at my current job, I was really focused on building machine learning to do exactly that. Now with AI, the skill isn't obsolete. The need is definitely still there. But what underpins all that is the fundamental understanding of why I need to go through and organize and provide some kind of structure and shape to my data. And then the third one that it's really good at is building to best practices and standards. When we train these generative AI models, we train them on an absolute insanely huge amount of data. And with that, we have also taken and formulated the best practices and standards when writing software and baked it into these AI models. And so what that means is that by the time we get an output from AI, functionally, it's usually pretty sound. The rules that govern programming languages are much stricter than something like English or French or Spanish, for example. So we can very concretely identify when it's doing something well and when it's not doing something well. And as we are developing these generative AI models, we've gotten really good at saying, this works well, this does not. This is safe, this is not. So in terms of the human strengths and the things that will pair really well for vibe coding, our natural tendency to be very creative and very flexible in adjusting how we tackle problems. As humans, we can see a situation and we can adapt, and we don't always think about it in very concrete terms right away. But it is something that is very difficult to replicate because it's what we call fuzzy logic. Now, fuzzy logic is neither an A or B decision, but it might live somewhere in between. So think on a scale of somewhere between 0 and 1. The second thing that we're really good at is humans are much faster to react to something that doesn't look right, that is otherwise really confident, right? And that's kind of that sense of the uncanny valley, where something is technically hitting all the check marks to appear real, but there's something behind it that just says this is artificial or this is superficial. That is something that we are really good at picking out as humans because we apply so many heuristic models that it's really, really fast and efficient for us to course correct and adjust. The last thing that humans are really, really good at is adapting and providing some kind of mental framework or structure to fuzzy concepts. Fuzzy concepts are those things that don't really have shape. It's very abstract. So think like in terms of defining what a feeling or an emotion is. Emotions and feelings and human nature are probably one of the fuzziest things out there. And it's because there's no rule of what defines one thing versus another. It's usually a combination of a number of other behaviors that, when put together, give us some kind of signal. And that signal is what we provide feedback to as humans. Computers and AI don't see it that way. They still very much see binary decisions, even with generative AI. And so when we put all that together, when we think about the three strengths that AI is really good at, so just to recap, it's being able to research data really, really fast, being able to summarize data really, really well, and being able to build with best standards. We pair that with our strengths as humans, and that's where we kind of get this really elegant merging of that key individual that can take a human approach, apply it to generative AI, and come up with some really cool stuff. And honestly, that's why I'm really excited about vibe coding. I think it unlocks so much potential and so many more possibilities. What we're going to start seeing in the near future are some really cool things coming out of the new young minds. And so I fully embrace it myself, but even more so, I'm excited to see what the next generation brings us. So that's all I have for today. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment. It really helps me out. I'm trying to grow the channel. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you in the next one.